You didn't break after you left. You started breaking while you were still there. There is a kind of psychological collapse that doesn't look dramatic. It doesn't involve screaming. It doesn't involve visible chaos. It happens quietly. You're still in the relationship. You're still showing up, still functioning, still answering messages, still trying. But internally, something is shifting. You begin doubting small things, then bigger things, then yourself. You start walking on eggshells, not because someone explicitly told you to, but because you've learned that any wrong tone, any wrong word, any wrong reaction can trigger tension. So you adjust, you soften your voice, you edit your thoughts before speaking, you rehearse conversations in your head, you stop saying certain things altogether. Self-censorship becomes normal. And the most dangerous part is this: you don't recognize it as collapse. You think it's compromise. You think it's patience. You think it's love. But psychologically, your nervous system is beginning to contract. You are no longer expressing yourself freely. You are surviving the emotional climate. That's where the collapse begins. One of the central drivers of this collapse is gaslighting. Gaslighting doesn't always look aggressive. Often it looks calm, measured, confident. You bring up something that hurt you, and instead of discussion, you're told that never happened. You're too sensitive. You're overthinking. You misunderstood. At first you resist. You remember clearly. You know what was said. You know what you felt. But over time, repetition erodes certainty. You begin replaying conversations in your mind. You check your memory against theirs. You look for evidence that you might be wrong. And here's the part that scares people. You begin trusting their version of reality more than your own. Not because they're right, but because your brain is exhausted from defending itself. When your perception is constantly challenged, the mind doesn't fight forever. It adapts. And adaptation in this context looks like doubt. That doubt becomes the foundation of the psychological collapse. The human brain is not designed for constant emotional instability. When you live in an environment where tension can rise at any moment, your nervous system shifts into survival mode. Chronic stress activates cortisol. Cortisol is useful in short bursts. It helps you react quickly, stay alert, protect yourself. But when cortisol remains elevated for weeks, months, or years, the brain begins to change. You become hyper-aware. You scan for tone changes, facial expressions, subtle shifts in energy. You anticipate conflict before it happens. This state is exhausting because you are never fully relaxed. Even during calm moments, your body is waiting. Mentally, this leads to fatigue, decision fatigue, emotional fatigue, cognitive overload. You may notice it becomes harder to concentrate, harder to remember things, harder to feel motivated. This is not weakness, it's neurological strain. Your brain is prioritizing survival over creativity, joy, or clarity. And when survival becomes your default state, identity begins to shrink. Psychological collapse doesn't announce itself. It shows up in symptoms. You forget things you normally wouldn't forget. Simple tasks feel heavier than they should. You feel emotionally drained even when nothing big happened that day. Motivation decreases. Things you once cared about feel distant. You may experience numbness, not dramatic sadness, not explosive anger, just flatness. Conversations feel harder. Socializing feels like effort. You withdraw, but you don't fully understand why. You start asking yourself quiet questions. Why am I so tired? Why can't I focus? Why don't I feel like myself anymore? And because the abuse is subtle, you often blame yourself. You assume you're stressed, or depressed, or overly sensitive. But the collapse isn't coming from inside you. It's a response to prolonged psychological pressure. Your system is overloaded, and when overload becomes normal, you stop recognizing it as abnormal. That's how people stay far longer than they thought they ever would. If you're collapsing internally, why don't you leave? Because the bond isn't logical, it's chemical. Intermittent reinforcement is powerful. Moments of warmth, Moments of apology, moments of affection, followed by distance, criticism, instability. That unpredictability creates trauma bonding. Your brain releases dopamine during reconciliation. Relief feels like love, calm feels like reward. You begin associating the end of tension with emotional closeness. So even while collapsing, part of you is still waiting for the next good moment. Hope becomes the glue, not because you're naive, but because your nervous system is addicted to relief. And leaving would mean losing both the pain and the relief. That ambivalence keeps people stuck. At this point, many people believe one thing: if I just leave, this collapse will stop. But here's the truth: leaving doesn't automatically restore your nervous system. It doesn't instantly rebuild your identity. You think leaving will end the collapse. It doesn't. It just changes shape, and that's what we're going to talk about next.